increase the positive incentives of original authors. If there is some positive reinforcement from having your study on the list. And we did actually have one original author say to us, I was actually complimented by the fact that my study ended up on your list. One original author said that. So we have a replication paper series that we publish the studies that we fund in, and we publish the studies whether or not they're successful or supporting or not supporting. But it also accepts submissions from outside. So if somebody conducts a replication study, even in one of their graduate classes, and it's fully supportive, it says, yep, this paper was great, and here's all of the replication work that I did, we'll publish that in our paper series. So the idea was to not have publication bias in this series that would only want to publish papers that show some kind of failure. We have a very heavy external review process for the studies that we fund that includes external advisor that follows the whole project along with internal reviewers and then an anonymous referee at the end. We edit the replication studies that we publish heavily for tone and language. So we're very careful that these papers don't say error 150 times or that make claims that the original authors made this mistake unless they actually identify the mistake and so on. And I can tell you that we've changed dramatically the tone of papers from early drafts to later drafts. Try to separate the discussion in the papers of the pure from the other to make more clear the difference between really the research process, the role that the replication plays in the research process versus the role that the replication might play in the policy informing process. And then obviously to increase the incentives to do replication research, which might otherwise be considered boring or where you don't know what the returns, we have small grants. And the first two windows, or I think the first window was 10,000 and the second window was 15,000. Third window works a little bit differently. But so we didn't expect that we were fully compensating people for their time, but rather giving them a little bit of a positive incentive to conduct replication research, even if the study were to be found to be successful. And finally, on the original author side, we have data preparation release grants. So we actually have grants that original authors can get if they're on our candidate studies list, regardless of whether their paper is chosen. So they become eligible by virtue of being on the list for that paper. Small grants to help them to defer their costs preparing their data and other information for possible replication. On the ethics side, so we post for the studies that we fund, we post the replication plans on our website. So those are public documents available not just to the original authors, but to everyone. And we have what's called the Notification and Communications Policy, and there's a story behind it, which I'll tell you if you want to know. But it includes things like when we fund a study, the replication researcher, regardless of whether there's a public replication file, has to notify the original authors that they're about to undertake the replication and that the replication plan is available. They have to share the results of the pure replication with the original authors as soon as they're done with the pure. So the original authors see the results of the pure up front, and they are not required. We can't require them to comment on it. They're certainly allowed to comment on them, and we expect the replication researchers to take into account those comments. If a replication researcher under one of our grants wants to give a seminar to present a study before it's public, they have to notify us and the original authors 4 weeks in advance, and they have to share 4 weeks in advance what they're going to present. So that the original authors have some advance notice if certain, what the findings are that might be presented and what's going to be said. And finally, we give the original authors right of reply, so they have a certain period of time, and if they submit their reply within that time, we post it at the same time that we post the study. If they submit it any time after, we'll post it as soon as we have it. So it's not like they lose that opportunity, but we don't hold the paper forever waiting for the original authors to give reply. And then finally, as I said, we have an external peer review process. So, did we succeed or fail? I'll go back to the top. So as far as this goes, I think we kind of failed. And we failed in the following sense, and this is the argument that Michael Clemens is kind of making in his recent paper, which is once you use the word replication, people want to use the word succeed or fail. That it's very hard, once you're using that term, it's hard to get people into the sphere of the policy informing process, into understanding that we're really asking about how meaningful the results are for policymaking rather than judging whether the paper is right or wrong. The word replication wants people want to judge. And so one of the things that we think going forward is that we need to not just come up with better adjectives in front of the word replication, but perhaps think about terminology differently. And I think we also, it's very hard to get people to think about these larger objectives. A lot of people, and again, the journals are really more focused on, are these results in this one paper right or wrong? And if they're right, nothing else matters. Go do another study. Incentives, I think the results are a little bit mixed. We have certainly had some interest in our grants program, so there are some people now who I think who are more interested in doing replication research. We've only had one original author team ever apply for our data preparation and release grant, which kind of surprised us. As I said, we've done a lot with tone and language, but again, the outside world doesn't see that. They only see the final result. And what we found is that original authors also, I mean, they sort of take everything negatively. It doesn't really matter how subdued the tone of the replication paper is. If there's anything in that paper that suggests a different result, they act as though that paper has made terrible, violent claims against them. So as far as the candidate studies list, I think we succeeded in the sense that we actually are funding replications that are actually showing pretty supporting results. So it's not like we're funding a bunch of studies where people went out and picked a paper that they knew that they could disprove. And we had one original author who felt complimented that his paper was on there. In terms of the ethics, I think we've succeeded in the sense that that these things have happened. So we have prevented replication research from being presented publicly when there are only preliminary results without notification. And in fact, somebody, fortunately it was London, but somebody notified us, a 3IE staff member from another office said, we think that this replication study is going to be presented. Did you know about it? And we had to reach out and say, go back and look at the terms of your grant agreement. You can't do that without this notification period. And they actually postponed the seminar so that they could meet the terms of the notification period. And so a lot of these things have happened. Whether or not they've really changed how people view replication or think more positively about it, we're still a long way off from that. I also think that no matter how hard we try, there's two human limitations that we have a hard time overcoming. One is the not on my study problem. So I can't even count for you the number of email messages or even original author replies that we've seen that say, I think replication is great. I am a full supporter of replication. It's just this particular study on my study is wrong and terrible and irresponsible, and 3IE has done terrible, terrible things, right? Replication is great, but not on my study. And the other thing is that there does seem to be this innate desire, and I don't know whether it's human or maybe it's instilled in us in graduate school, to get a little bit excited when you find out that somebody did something wrong. You know, we're doing some in-house replication studies, and the times when people come to my office and say, guess what I found, is more often the, guess what I found. They grossly exaggerated their coefficient estimates rather than, guess what, it replicated exactly. Okay? Now the one time we did get that is when somebody spent a year trying to consolidate 12 different data sets and 3 different treatment assignments, and finally said, I finally got table 1, right? So from the diagnostic standpoint, they get very excited from the reproduction. But you know, it's hard to ignore the excitement that you get when you've think you're just a little bit smarter than the next guy. So as I said, partly since we have about 13 to 15 studies that have been completed or in some form of being finished or that we have canceled. So we have canceled low quality studies. Again, nobody sees what we don't put out there, so it's hard to get credit for that. But we've had lots of people tell us what we should do, so we decided to actually make them come together in a room and tell us what we should do. So we're holding this event a week from yesterday in Washington, where we'll have some of the studies presented, we'll have some of the conceptual research presented, including Fernando's paper, Michael Clemens' paper, and this paper, but then have some time for people to really talk about these challenges and what role could be played by an organization like 3IE and what we might do differently going forward. So if you're going to be in Washington next Friday, you'd like to come, let me know, we'll invite you.
Good. Do you want to field some questions?
Yes, I think Betsy had her hand up about